Okay, so we are canning stew today in my outdoor kitchen. What I did is I prepped all of my ingredients yesterday evening. It takes a long time to get all this stuff chopped and peeled. It's not hard, but it's just a little time consuming, and so I did it last night and I'm canning it this morning. You can do that. Make sure everything goes in the fridge overnight, obviously. So this is peeled and chopped potatoes. Yes, you do need to peel your potatoes. This is chopped onion. In this pot here, I've got chopped carrots, peeled and chopped carrots, and then my meat is in this pot also just because I wanted to save room in the fridge, so I put it all together. And that meat is, this is venison that I took out of the freezer. You can use beef. You're just going to cube it and you're going to brown it, and I did that last night also. So all of this is ready to go in the pot. I'm going to put it in this large stock pot. I'm going to cover it with water and add some bouillon, and then we'll get ready to process it. All right, so I got everything in my stock pot here. I don't know if you can see, it's a big old pot of stew. You can see, let me bring this closer. You can see that I've got this covered with liquid. I have enough broth in here to make it so that I'm sure that I have enough broth to cover all of the jars. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add bouillon and salt and pepper. Remember, you can add different spices or seasonings if you prefer. Make sure that it's dried seasonings. You don't want to add fresh seasonings to this. I know that it seems nitpicky, but you want to use dried because fresh seasonings could change things up. Oh, I'm really distracted here because I'm just looking at some deer that just came in my yard. Oh, here, let me see if I can get a video. Okay, I was going to try to get closer. I don't know if you can see them, but they spotted me and I don't want to scare them away. Right there, there's a couple deer. Actually, there's 1, 2, 3, 3 in the open and a couple in the bushes there. Oh, the joy of canning outside. You get totally distracted. Back to the stew. Okay, so I totally forgot where I was at. I'm totally distracted. So I have enough water in here to cover and make sure that it's nice and soupy because I want to make sure I have enough broth to cover in the jars. I think I was talking about spices. You can add different seasonings if you'd like, but it must be dried. Don't add fresh. This is a ball canning recipe. They call for salt and pepper and thyme. I don't really want thyme in here, so I'm just doing salt and pepper, and I'm adding bouillon because I want the flavor of the bouillon in there. Now you can add, I know I have added bay leaf to my stew before. I'm not doing that today. If you choose to add bay leaf, make sure that you take the leaf out after, before you put them in the jars, because you don't want that bay leaf to end up in one jar because that jar will be really strong bay flavor. But you can add different seasonings, whatever you'd like. Make sure it's dried. Now I am adding, like I said, salt and pepper. So we are going to do 1.5 tablespoons of salt. Ball only calls for 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. That's not nearly enough. So I'm going to add, I don't have a teaspoon here. Oh yes I do, hang on. I'm going to add at least 1 teaspoon of pepper. But remember, this is to taste. So if you like more, you can do more. If you don't like as much, you don't have to do as much. And then I am adding bouillon, like I said. You can use whatever bouillon brand you like. I went ahead and pre-measured it because I thought I'm never going to be able to talk and measure at the same time. As you're adding your water to your soup or your stew, measure how much water you add, and then just look at the package of bouillon that you use and use that measurement to figure out how much bouillon to put in there. So I used a powdered bouillon. Make sure whatever bouillon you use, it's just bouillon. Make sure it's not like a soup mix. You don't want any thickeners in it, anything like that. So it just needs to be bouillon. That is what I added there. I'm going to stir that up. Now all I need to do is bring this to a boil, and then we're ready to fill jars. It does not have to fully cook. The meat, remember, is pre-browned, and so it's already partially cooked. But you want this to heat up before you put it in the jars. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on, and then I'm going to get my canning stuff out. And yeah, we'll be back. I got my canner over here ready to go. I don't know if you can see it in the background here. Because we are camping. Did I already mention this? We're camping on the Camp Chef stove. So I'll show you that in a little bit here. But let me get my canning stuff out, and we'll start filling jars. Okay, so this has finally come to a boil. It seemed like forever. I should have timed it. I don't know how long it took, but remember that all that was in the refrigerator overnight, so it was cold. So yeah, it took forever. But it is now boiling. My canner is hot. It's not quite boiling, but it is hot. The jars are in the canner warming up. Here, let me show that to you. This around here. So my jars are in here warming up. This is my stew, which is now boiling. I could put my jars over here and fill from here, but it's kind of a gap, and it's not like when you're in the kitchen and it's really close. So I'm going to slop all over. So I decided to put my extra pressure canner rack here. That is where I'm going to work on filling my jars. I have a little container here with the lids. It is just in warm water. Does not have to be boiled. And so, yeah, let me go ahead and get a jar out and we will start filling jars. All right, so we are filling jars. I have my hot jar, my canner is hot and the jars are in there warming up. This is my hot stew. I went ahead and put a, just my extra pressure canner tray here just to make it nice and close where I'm working. It's a little awkward to work over here on the table. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. Let me go ahead. Okay, so what I'd like to do is use a slotted spoon. You don't have to use a slotted spoon, but I like to fill my ingredients up about 2/3 full. Now this is, sorry, there's a bug flying. This is a ball tested canning recipe, and so I went by the ingredient amounts for that recipe, and I am processing it for the same amount of time. If you want to make stew with your own ingredients, suppose maybe you don't really want, I don't know, what would you not want in stew? Maybe you want to add something to your stew, like green beans or something else like that. What I would suggest you do is use the soup processing directions. So with the soup processing, what you're going to do is you're going to fill your ingredients halfway, and then the rest of the jar will be broth. And you may think, well, this isn't soup, this is stew. Well, when you open the jar, you're going to thicken it, and it works out fine. It's still enough broth that you can thicken up your stew, and I've done it before, and it works great. This recipe, because I'm following the ball testing, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more solid ingredients. And then let me get my ladle, and I will top that off with broth. And the broth needs to come up to the 1-inch headspace. I have something on my jar. So 1 inch is about at that collar. That is important because you want those jars to vent properly when they're processing. So venting means all of that air is going to be, all the oxygen is expelled out of the jar. All right, and then the last step, oh, nope, not last step. Then you want to remove any air bubbles. Now usually I have a bubble tool or my orange peeler. Where did it go? Hang on a second. I always forget something. Okay, well, it's not here. So I'm going to use the handle to my bubble tool. And you just, because it's so soupy, it's so liquidy, you just want to move things around, make sure there's no air bubbles stuck down in there. Remove the funnel. Then you are going to wipe down the lid. And I just use a little water on a paper towel. Make sure that rim is nice and clean. Use your bubble tool, or not your bubble tool, your lid lifter, and put a lid on there and a ring and finger tight, and that jar is ready to go in the canner. So just repeat that process until all of your jars are filled. All right, so all of my jars are in the canner. I'm going to go ahead and put the lid on. I turned the heat up. There's a mark here and here. If you're using a Presto, obviously just close it up according to the Presto directions. With the All-American, I like to kind of eyeball this line here and just make sure it's fairly level. The only time I have ever had this thing not seal was when I put the lid on crooked. So if the lid's crooked, it's not going to seal. Okay, so as this heats, it's going to come to a boil. Steam is going to start coming out of this vent. You want to let that steam flow for 10 minutes, and then you're going to place your weight on. Then the pressure will start building. While the pressure is building, this dial will start going up, but it is just a guide. You want to go by the weight on the All-American canner. While this is heating, after you put the weight on, it's going to start building pressure. When that weight jiggles, you'll know it's at pressure. and you can start your processing time there. In this case, on the All-American, that dial is just a guide. You go by the weight. So I use 15 pounds weight. You'll need to check the recipe and see what weight you need to use, because it depends on your elevation or altitude. Because we're processing quarts, we're going to process for an hour and 30 minutes. If we were doing pints, it would be an hour and 15. And then after the processing time, you're going to let things cool down, and I will talk about that when we get to that point. All right, so my cannon has been heating up, and I don't know if you can hear it or see it. So the steam is coming out of that vent pipe, and I have been venting it for 10 minutes. I'm ready to go ahead and put my weight on. I use a 15-pound weight. I use a 15-pound weight. You need to check the recipe and see what weight you need to use according to your elevation. Now is when the canner starts building pressure, and so you can watch this dial and it's going to start going up. When this weight jiggles, that's when you know it's at pressure. The dial is just kind of a guide, it's an estimate, go by the weight. After it is at pressure, that is when you're going to start your processing time. You're going to process it for the full time, making sure that this weight jiggles every once in a while so that you know that it's remaining at the right pressure. You can also watch the dial just as a guide. Okay, and then when your processing time is done, we're going to process for an hour and 30 minutes because we're doing quarts. If you were doing pints, you would be processing for an hour and 15 minutes. So at the end of that hour and 30 minutes, we are going to let the canner cool down, shut the heat off, let the canner cool down right where it is. We're not going to move it. We're not going to put a fan on it. We're not going to try to encourage anything to cool faster. When the pressure is back at 0, go ahead and take the weight off. I like to give it like a 5-minute weight rest period, 5 or 10 minutes after I take the weight off. And then you're going to open the lid and just let some of the steam out and just set it on there sideways. Let the canner cool down again another 5 or 10 minutes. That just gives those jars a chance to depressurize, and you won't get as much liquid loss in your jars if you do that. After that time, you go ahead and take your jars out. You can set them out on the counter. Don't cover them, just set them out, let them cool completely on the counter overnight is what I usually do. 12 hours is recommended until they're room temperature, and then you're going to check the seals and make sure that they are sealed. To do that, you take the ring off and you just lift up on that lid a little bit and see if it's sealed. Wash your jars. It's likely that they might be a little bit greasy. That's kind of normal with stew and meat products. Just wash them off. Make sure you label it so you know what's in the jar, and then it's ready for storage on the shelf. So canning stew, it's not hard, it's a little time consuming, but it gives you yummy food in the winter. It's kind of a comfort food. Whip up some cornbread and stew. It's one of my favorite meals. Have a great day.